No, man. No, boys. Slam it. Really slam it. Really slam it. Go on, slam it. Yeah. Oh, that was terrible. That was loud enough. That was terrible.
A British patriot has been arrested. Yes, arrested for chanting, "Come on, England," in the very country whose name he dared to utter. What would once been considered a harmless, even wholesome expression of national pride has now been recast as a potential hate crime, or at the very least, public disturbance. This is not satire. It's the grim, Orwellian reality of modern Britain, where waving the St. George's flag too proudly or chanting support for your country can be interpreted by authorities as a political provocation. In a twisted inversion of logic, patriotism is now policed while actual crime remains unchecked. Let's be clear. This isn't about football chants or noise complaints. This is about a dangerous shift in national identity, where Britishness itself is treated as something suspicious, potentially offensive, and inherently problematic. The arrest of a citizen for simply saying, "Come on, England," is more than just an overreaction. It's a declaration that traditional expressions of national pride are no longer welcome in the country they once defined. Imagine being in France and shouting "Vive la France," only to be led away in handcuffs. Absurd. In Britain, it's becoming normalized. This incident underscores a broader trend, the institutional contempt for patriotism, especially when expressed by ordinary working-class citizens. The elites in Westminster and media circles are deeply uncomfortable with overt displays of national identity unless they come wrapped in multicultural platitudes or Olympic gold medals. But when a man in a flat cap raises a pint and shouts "Come on, England" on a street corner, suddenly it's dangerous. It's far-right adjacent. It's cause for surveillance. This selective criminalization of patriotism is deeply corrosive to social cohesion. It tells a large portion of the population that their identity, their pride, their culture are no longer acceptable. Meanwhile, actual crimes, knife attacks, grooming gangs, public disorder in lawless city centers are often downplayed or ignored by the same authorities who seem to have endless energy for prosecuting microaggressions. How can a society survive when it prioritizes prosecuting patriotism over protecting its people? How can citizens feel safe or represented when their most basic cultural instincts are treated with suspicion? There's a reason the public is losing trust in institutions. There's a reason political outsiders and so-called fringe parties are gaining momentum. It's because ordinary Brits feel like strangers in their own land, shouted down for flying a flag sidelined in their own communities, and now arrested for cheering on their national team. If the chant "Come on, England" can be criminalized in England, then what is left of England at all? This arrest should not just alarm patriots. It should alarm anyone who believes in free expression, cultural integrity, and basic common sense. Because once national pride becomes a punishable offense, you're not just witnessing the decline of a country, you're watching its deliberate dismantling.
A lot of UK Chinese trade is in non-contentious areas, agricultural products, life sciences, or automotive. It's not difficult. I think where as a country, we've got it wrong in the past. You had a phase, I think the sort of David Cameron, George Osborne phase initially, it was far too naive about some of this. You had a phase, to be frank, under the Conservative government, just before they lost office, where they wouldn't engage at all, and that was inappropriate. We're a real outlier. There was no political engagement. The US has some very assertive measures in place to China, but they do have political engagement. So I think the balance was wrong. I think you've got to be clear about what is the sort of sector where actually we can promote and cooperate, and ones, frankly, where we can't. I wouldn't personally bring a Chinese company into our steel sector.
You would not bring a Chinese company?
I wouldn't. That's it. I think steel is a very sensitive area. I don't know the Boris Johnson government when they did this, what exactly the situation was, but I think it's a sensitive area.
Sensitive areas? What about nuclear power, for example?
I wouldn't want to, on an interview, make that kind of specific determination, but I think we can't ignore China. I mean, China's a fifth of the global economy. You know, what they do has an impact on us. And where we can have areas where we can cooperate in our mutual interest, I think that is a good...
But there's a high trust bar now, isn't there?
Yes. We've got to recognise that. And again, I don't want people to think that this particular situation is more than just the company itself. But, you know, companies operate in different environments. And look, what we were offering to not have to recall Parliament in terms of the offer around raw materials, the British government making sure there'd be no losses if Xingye purchased those, actually then increasing the generosity of that offer. Any company, I think, operating in a sort of rational economic manner would say that we'll take that offer.
When Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds declares that he wouldn't have brought a Chinese company into the British steel sector, it might sound like a moment of principled clarity, a late awakening to the dangers of strategic dependence on hostile foreign powers. But the moment is swiftly undercut when Trevor Phillips, with sharp precision, asks the obvious follow-up. What about nuclear power? Reynolds doesn't answer. He dodges, he sidesteps. He changes the subject. And in that brief exchange, we see the full picture of Britain's muddled, incoherent industrial strategy come into view. The steel sector is undeniably critical, the backbone of national infrastructure, defense, and manufacturing. But nuclear energy, that's the lifeblood of the country's future energy independence. To express concern over Chinese involvement in steel, while glossing over or outright avoiding the fact that Chinese state-owned enterprises have embedded themselves into the UK's nuclear grid, including the controversial Hinkley Point C project, reeks of either political cowardice or strategic negligence. This is not just a policy contradiction. It's a national security farce. If the UK government now recognizes the risks of allowing Beijing to control chunks of our steel industry, why was it ever acceptable to hand over the keys to our energy infrastructure? Why is it only now, under growing geopolitical pressure and scrutiny, that ministers are performing rhetorical backflips to distance themselves from past decisions? Reynolds' failure to answer Trevor Phillips' nuclear question reveals the deeper malaise of Britain's leadership class. They want the optics of national sovereignty without the difficult reckoning that true sovereignty requires. It's easy to posture against Chinese steel when there's no deal on the table. Much harder to confront the fact that previous governments, including Labour-led ones, welcomed Chinese state capital into the most sensitive corners of British infrastructure, all in the name of investment and short-term cost savings. This isn't just about China. It's about a pattern of strategic short-sightedness that has left Britain vulnerable to economic coercion and geopolitical blackmail. Whether it's steel, nuclear, telecoms, or AI, the UK has repeatedly sold critical assets to foreign powers, then acted shocked when those decisions come back to bite. The Reynolds response is a symptom of that disease. One part denial, one part deflection, and zero accountability, and the public sees it. Voters are increasingly fed up with politicians who talk tough only after the damage is done, who dodge hard questions, and who think they can play both sides of the global chessboard without consequence. If the UK is serious about regaining control over its own economy, then ministers like Reynolds need to do more than offer hollow declarations. They need to explain how and why we got here, and more importantly, what they're going to do to fix it. Because if dodging the nuclear question is the best answer we get from the business secretary, then the British public should start asking whether their leaders are guarding the future or selling it off one sector at a time.